nerves. Better shake your booties for black girl nerves.
Tim, thank you so much for your time this morning. These types of films are particularly special to me. I have family from the South who love Westerns and just those periods in our history. So I've watched a lot of movies on these moments in history, and I enjoy them very much. Beginning with Old Henry, we've met Henry and his son Wyatt, who seem to be living a nondescript life. They're minding their business and their world gets turned upside down. But before we talk about that, what is the oldest Western you remember seeing? Or did you even watch any Westerns or any of those types of films when you were young?
So oldest Western, probably the Gene Autry movies. So going back well before the Second World War. And the first Westerns I watched were all the Sergio Leone Westerns. And that's really my favorite period of Western, where post John Wayne and the Searchers, you have truly flawed characters introduced as heroes and a sort of ruthless ugliness that is tied to a kind of moral code all its own and specific to the rugged American West, really interested me as a boy. So I'm talking about when I was about 8 to when I graduated high school. I watched those films relentlessly because they were on every weekend where I grew up in Oklahoma on television. And all my friends watched them as well. And so we had a common aesthetic and a common vocabulary that was rooted in everything from the dialogue to the facial expressions of Lee Van Cleef and Clint Eastwood, Eli Wallach, Charles Bronson, Henry Fonda, the characters who are in those movies in extreme close-up. And that was also, those movies were my introduction, as strange as it sounds, to cinema as an art form, because I think they are works of art. They're everything you want in a work of art. Mm-hmm. They're utterly subjective. They have a worldview. They're both literal and abstract. They're narrative, but also metaphorical. They're ultimately philosophical. And they're beautiful to look at, or sometimes ugly to look at if that's what's necessary. And there's real care taken to the image and the use of sound and music. And I didn't understand that movies could do that. I just would go to the cinema to watch the story. I never thought about the filmmaker until I saw Sergio Leone movies.
When you look at those characters and just immersing that part of your childhood and talking about them with their friends, did you form an opinion of good and bad, of gray, or when you think of all those type of archetypes, how did you kind of compartmentalize them and how did they inform how you portrayed Henry for this movie?
Well, what I saw in the Sergio Leone movies was ugliness. And yes, there was good and bad, but it wasn't a Manichaean or dualistic worldview. Everyone was flawed. Mm-hmm. And even with a character like Lee Van Cleef in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, you don't see him as entirely bad. He's a son of a bitch. But somehow Sergio Leone allows you to delight in him and also to infer a point of view that isn't cartoonish. He's a real guy. And with the character of Blondie in that movie, he's not all good. He's a really flawed character. You know, when he replaces Tuco with another partner who's sitting atop the horse waiting for Clint Eastwood, for Blondie to shoot out the noose, and he asks if Tuco, who's got him at gunpoint, if he can save the guy's life, and Tuco says no. And the guy gets hung. Clint Eastwood's Blondie is indifferent. He makes a joke. This is not a good guy. So I only learned later that in Westerns, you could have a white hat and a black hat by watching the post-war, you know, the more John Ford Westerns. What I like, you know, the although The Searchers is John Ford, the earlier Westerns post-war were celebrating a good and evil. You know, the good guy was a good guy and the bad guy was a bad guy. I'm most interested in flawed Western characters because that was my way in. And I think that that's who and what the character of Henry is. And that's what really interested me in playing this role. Mm-hmm. He's more in the Unforgiven tradition.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. With what's particularly intriguing, these are some very specific characters that the audience is going to be introduced to and watch their journey together. And there's a beautiful interweaving of all these people. So we don't know who we're dealing with. We don't know who's on the right side. It's presented in a way that we think we know who the antagonist is and the protagonist is, but it's not that way at all as we get through the layers. When all of you, so much of it's shot in one room, when you and Gavin and Scott are together, how do those days start for you? What do you guys talk about to kind of set the tone for the day? Because the three of you are together for huge parts of the film.
Well, we all had our different approaches. Scott Hayes is a very intense actor, and he brings that to the proceedings. So he's playing a character in terrible pain for a lot of the film. And in an effort to make that work for him and to give Posse, the director, something credible on screen, he was bringing that in the morning. You know, so you felt like even when the camera wasn't rolling, whatever, between takes, he was in that pain. And my attitude is, as long as an actor isn't intruding on anybody else's process, do whatever you want. But that brought a focus and a gravity and a kind of quiet to the set every day Scott was on. And that was great. Gavin, a little more happy-go-lucky, although very serious and, you know, completely professional. And I don't know where I fit into all that, except that, you know, I have a new approach to the way that I work as an actor, and so much of what I try to bring to a role now happens in the months before we're shooting. As just one example, I now no longer show up on set and without knowing the entire part, to the extent that I could walk in not knowing what's going to be shot on a particular day and just go and do it. And so that especially needed to be the case with this part, because there was so much demanded of me physically, whether it was working with props like guns or tools, or bandaging a character as if I'd done it 1,000 times before, to literally physically, the physical stuff, carrying somebody on my back and, throwing a 170-pound guy into a pig pen, which the character does in a movie, strangling somebody to death, or running through whatever, all the physical demands. That was about the prep. It wasn't about just showing up on the day and being able to do it. And so I try to be on, during the shooting day, as relaxed and ready as possible, and not to put too much pressure on myself. And that's why I do so much prep ahead of time. So I'm not bearing down on myself, and I'm not overly tense on the day, but it's just simply there, and I'm confident about that. And so I guess that's my approach. And with Scott's intensity and my trying to relax with all the prep, and Gavin just being a cool, happy-go-lucky kid, I think it was a mixture that worked.
It absolutely was. I truly, truly enjoyed this. I'm going to run it back and watch it again. I thank you for your time. I could talk to you for a long time.
Well, I'll come back on your show anytime. You have the coolest website or whatever it is, Black Girl Nerds. That's the best name of any outlet I'll meet today. So hats off to you. And
I appreciate it.
I'm waiting for this.
I'm going to make it. Since when you spoke it. Thank you so much, Tim.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Better shake your booties for Black Girl Nerds. Better shake your booties for Black Girl Nerds.